On my channel, I've ripped IGN a new one before by angrily shouting at some of their worst reviews, although despite making a lot of top 10s on this channel, I never did the same for WatchMojo.
One of the more common 5-star guards, and yet far manic, so make sure that you can deploy blue poison at the right place so that she won't be taking a lot of damage.
Time to fix that, I guess! As someone who got into Arknights a couple months ago, I'm gonna make my own version of that video in a horrible attempt to convert more people into playing this over Genshin Impact. Although, that becomes more difficult despite the game turning into Arknights Impact, as I only have thick thighs to compete against Goat Milky and Mona's thick ass. On screen, I have the general format for the video, and before you ask, no, Amiya isn't the honorable 11th spot. I just wanted to make a Shrek joke. Donkey! If you're watching this video, I will assume you're familiar with Arknights terminology, as I'll cover each operator's potential at E1 max level with more detailed information on screen. Trust bonuses will already be calculated into the stats, with the parentheses simply highlighting the benefits from those. The effects of all skills I cover will be at rank 7, while E2 potential is also max level and assumes both skills are M3s. If none of that made any sense to you, I hope you enjoy looking at the waifus. Rankings will be determined by a mix of what I've seen on other tier lists and usage stats, but it's mostly my opinion. The video will also only consist of operators added to the game within the first year of Global's launch, as that's what I, and I assume most of you watching, are playing. Specialist operators won't be on this list, as it is difficult to judge their usefulness in a vacuum, so WatchMojo's favorite common guard won't be on here. Before I get started, know that Arknights has incredible flexibility in its map design, which allows for near infinite solutions, so if your waifu or husbando isn't on this list, it doesn't mean that they're bad, unless it's savage. Now with all that out of the way, sit back, kick back, and relax, dear viewer, as this dumb doctor spends his sanity justifying his gambling addiction. The first operator I'm going to talk about is one of the better healers in the game, Silence. Silence is a single target healer with the following skills. Her first skill is a generic attack boost, which is almost never used, as her second skill, Medical Drone, is much more useful. The drone can be deployed on any open tile, and it heals all targets in a 1-tile radius. The drone costs 5 deployment points, cannot be attacked, has AoE burst healing, but it self-destructs 10 seconds after being deployed. Her talent, Booster Injection, gives all medic operators, including herself, a flat +6 attack speed buff. Silence is a great healer, but she doesn't bring any gimmicks to the table. She heals your operators, heals them well, and can even heal operators outside of her range with the drone. What makes the drone even more useful is the fact that Silence will begin charging for another one immediately after you deploy it, meaning that the downtime between drones is only 12 seconds. When E2'd, Silence sticks to her role as Booster Injection has its effects doubled, and when her drone skill reaches M3, the amount of time it takes to charge decreases to 18 seconds, reducing the downtime between drone deployments by 33%. The drone's healing capabilities don't scale with the skill's mastery level, but it scales with Silence's level, as it increases from 90 HP per heal at E1 max level to 125 HP per heal at E2 max level, which goes a long way since the drone heals multiple times per second. The only shortcoming Silence has is how straightforward an operator she is. She doesn't have any extra utility outside of healing operators outside of her range, which you may not need depending on your team composition if you use medic defenders or other operators who can give passive recovery. Silence doesn't reinvent the wheel with her healing tactics, but she doesn't need to. If you're looking for a more unique healer, you'll take an interest in the vampire who isn't trying to turn you into a Scotty clone, Warfarin. Warfarin is also a single target healer, but she plays a different role. Her first skill, Emergency Triage, only activates when the target is below half HP, but this skill makes Warfarin's subsequent heal restore an additional 19% of the target's max HP on top of Warfarin's base heal. Warfarin can store up to 3 charges of this skill, and each charge is ready in just a few seconds. As useful as it is, it's not the main reason people use Warfarin, as her next skill is when things get bloody. Unstable Plasma inflicts the following status on both Warfarin and a random operator in her range when activated. For 15 seconds, both operators lose 3% of their max HP per second, but they also gain a 60% attack buff. If that skill sounds completely busted, that's because it is. Several operators already have crazy nuking potential as is, but a 60% attack buff to said operators helps them kill faster than an angry weeb with a death note. These skills can activate even sooner thanks to her talent. Blood Sample Recycle activates when an enemy dies in Warfarin's range, restoring 1 SP to both her and a random ally in her range. This all sounds good as is, but it gets even better at E2. Just like Silence, her talent's effect is doubled, and at M3, Emergency Triage can store up to 4 charges now, and heals an additional 25% of the target's max HP. Unstable Plasma, on the other hand, functions the same as before, but the attack buff increases to 90%. If you E2 Warfarin, prioritize ranking up this skill, as you can have operators solo entire maps with just that ability. I decided to place both single target healers next to each other on this list to show the diversity of roles operators can have even in the same class. Both are radically different from each other, but both are immensely useful. Silent is much better for newer players because of her simplicity, but Warfarin can function just fine as a regular healer too. However, if you use her with precise placement to maximize her buffing utility, you can recreate the destruction of Pompeii with your goat lolly. The next operator I want to talk about is also great at buffing, but is a defender. Liskarm is a defender who can hit up to 2 tiles in front of her, can attack aerial enemies, and has skills that charge as she gets hit, as you'd expect with the name of her first skill. Charge Defense activates automatically when ready, and the skill makes the next attack she takes do 0 damage and gives her an 80% defense buff that lasts for 8 seconds. Her second skill, Counter Arc, has a manual trigger and does the following. For 20 seconds, her attack interval increases, meaning she attacks more slowly, but Liskarm now deals AoE arts damage to all blocked enemies, gets a 125% attack buff, and has a 20% chance to trigger a 1-second stun. Sadly, there's a downside to this ridiculous power, as once the skill ends, Liskarm self-stuns for 5 seconds. While her second skill sounds OP on paper, it's not the main reason people use Liskarm. Her real utility lies in her talent, Tactical Defense. It activates each time Liskarm is hit and will grant 1 SP to both Liskarm and a random ally adjacent to her. This turns Liskarm into your thunder-powered battery, as you can place her next to allies with skills that have very long charge times in order to let you use them sooner for enhanced DPS. At E2, very little changes for Liskarm, and I'm not just talking about the artwork. At M3, Charge Defense now gives a 100% defense buff, and Charged Arc now gives more utility, as Liskarm can block up to 4 enemies while the skill is active, gets a 200% attack buff, but sadly still has the 5-second self-stun. That said, she is the only operator on this list who gets a new talent at E2, Thunder Resistance. Thunder Resistance gives Liskarm 10 resistance. Okay, I know that the vast majority of operators have 0 resistance, but just like in the original Fire Emblem, nobody gave a shit. E2ing Liskarm isn't something I personally recommend, but for those wanting to justify their Cherry Bomb Chen strats in late game content, it's something you have to do out of obligation since she desperately needs the stats. Liskarm's skills are inconsistent but can be devastating when pulled off. However, the main reason I have her here is because that talent can power up operators insanely quickly. Staying with support roles, let's look at an actual supporter, Shamare. Before I explain her skills, I'll have to go over her talent first, and you'll see why soon. Omen of Defeat inflicts all enemies in her range that have less than 40% HP with a fragile debuff. At E1, this causes enemies to take 20% more damage. This is important as her first skill, Malediction, gives Shamare a 40% attack buff and applies a 1.5 multiplier to her talent that has infinite duration. Shamare's second skill, Cursed Doll, functions similarly to Silence's Drone. The doll costs 5 DP to deploy, and it can be deployed on any open tile, it has a 1-tile radius, and it lasts for 15 seconds. All enemies in the doll's range have their attack and defense reduced by 30%. Her first skill is alright, I guess, but it takes too long to activate to have any meaningful use. The utility that her doll provides, however, is incredible, as you now have an answer to problematic boss enemies, and it becomes significantly more powerful at E2. At E2, Omen of Defeat's debuff increases to 30%, while Malediction activates 8 seconds sooner, and the attack buff increases to 60% while applying a 1.8 multiplier to her talent. However, the doll reigns supreme, as now it only needs 30 SP to charge, and it has its attack and defense debuffs increased to 50%. If your defenders are dying too quickly, then E2ing Shamare is a great choice, as I cannot stress enough how powerful the Cursed Doll is at M3. Shamare has great utility all around, and I'm somewhat underrating her since I believe her debuffs will scale well with future content, however, only time will tell. Some people might be wondering why I have Shamare on this list over Praminix, the current other debuff supporter in the game. Praminix is much stronger than Shamare, as she gets a talent that lets her attack twice per attack interval at E2, and her second skill at M3 has stronger debuffs than Shamare, but it hits resistance instead of attack. I mean, don't get me wrong, she's definitely viable, but I think Shamare is better because Praminix is trying to encourage more DPS with her skill, but if you want more DPS, you can just deploy another ranged operator instead. I just value Shamare's debuffs way more just because it's something completely unique to her. Next up is one of the more popular snipers in the game, Blue Poison. Blue Poison is a single target sniper with the standard attack range and prioritizes aerial enemies. Her first skill, Twin Shot Auto, deals 155% extra physical damage every 4th attack. Her second skill, Venom Spray, lasts for 26 seconds when activated and gives BP a 30% attack boost while letting her attack up to 2 additional targets with each attack. Blue Poison is a fantastic source of DPS, but these skills don't explain her operator name. That comes from her talent, Neurotoxin. At E1, all targets Blue Poison hits are poisoned, inflicting 30 arts damage every second for 3 seconds after being attacked. Like most snipers, BP is alright, but she truly hits her stride when she's E2'd. When E2'd, she gets the following. Twin Shot Auto activates every 3rd attack, and the attack damage increases to 200%, while Venom Spray lasts for 30 seconds, gives a 50% attack buff, still hits up to 2 additional targets, but also hits the primary target twice. Neurotoxin's damage increases from 30 to 75. Blue Poison is a simple operator. She does well late game as her talent lets her damage high defense enemies, which usually love eating all the you throw at them. While both M3s are good, most tend to prioritize her first skill as the activation every 3rd attack as opposed to every 4th attack quickly increases BP's overall DPS. If you want a powerful sniper, there are few options better than Blue Poison, and I heavily recommend her. Blue Poison is a popular operator because of how unique her effect is and her great design, but I feel I should also bring up her biggest 5-star competitor, Platinum. Platinum is another good sniper, but the reason that I have Blue Poison here and not her is because her second skill takes over a minute to charge up, and most maps don't last long enough for Platinum's DPS to surpass BP's. Neither operator is bad, but for the sake of a more diverse list, I wanted to give Blue Poison the spotlight as I think she scales better in late game content thanks to her talent, especially at E2. Originally, I was going to place this operator higher because of my bias towards her, as she was my first E2 5-star, and while the meta has shifted against her, Lappland is still pretty damn good. Lappland is a ranged guard, and like all ranged guards, her ranged attacks only use 80% of her base attack. Both of Lappland's skills charge offensively, but have radically different effects. Her first skill, Sundial, needs 33 SP to charge, has infinite duration, and gives Lappland a 55% attack buff and a 30% chance to resist physical damage. Okay, I need a moment to rip on Arknights localization here. Glorious memes and constant grammatical errors aside, poor word choice like this either gives wrong information on some skills or creates scenarios like this, where you have absolutely no idea what the hell this skill even does, and could be easily fixed by changing resist to dodge like I've done in the side here. Mini rant aside, Lappy's second skill, Wolf Spirit, needs 24 SP to activate, and when it does, for 17 seconds, Lappland gets a 90% attack buff, has the damage limiter on range attacks removed, and reminds her that she has 2 swords as she can hit up to 2 targets per attack. As if that wasn't enough, her attacks now also deal arts damage. Lappland's talent, Spiritual Destruction, has her attacks inflict the silence status for 1 second. If you want to know what silence does, just scroll the video back about 2 minutes into the video. Okay, what silence as an effect does is negate enemy abilities. This talent is the reason Lappland is so coveted and is one of the most used operators in the game. And at E2, it just gets better. Sundial needs 30 SP to activate, boosts Lappland's attack by 70%, and gives a 40% chance to dodge physical attacks. Wolf Spirit's attack boost increases to 120% and lasts for 20 seconds while only needing 17 SP to charge. As for her talent, take a guess as to how long it lasts. 2, 3 seconds? Nah son, that shit lasts for a whopping 5 seconds now, as this bitch will make everyone shut up, including you, and you'll like it as she takes care of those Originium slugs. I already torrented the localization once, I don't need to do it again. Lappland's silence may have trivialized a lot of the content in chapters 5 and 6 and CC0, but the dev team quickly realized that Lappland spam was abundant. Instead of bonking her with the nerf stick and putting her in horny jail for her crimes against Texas, as nerfing units would cause Phoenix Wright's main theme to start playing, objection! Hypergriff did the next best thing and just started slapping silence immunity onto enemies. With Lappland's best trait effectively ripped away from her in future high-level content, I had to base her capabilities on Wolf Spirit's potential, as while Sundial's consistency can make Lappland a solid frontline tank, the raw damage Wolf Spirit provides is worth the inconsistencies. As for why I put Lappland after Blue Poison and why the Spanish music has been playing for her in BP segments, it's because using polymerization on these two gives you the first 6-star coming to global after the anniversary, Thorns. I'm not going to go too in depth on him here as this segment is bloated enough as is and the video isn't about 6 stars, although I could cover him in a future video if enough people click those like and subscribe buttons. The short version is that Thorns is a ranged guard like Lappland, and his first talent is the same as Blue Poison's, but stronger. His third skill gives him both an attack buff and an attack speed buff, while also giving him sniper range. I put both these operators on this list here because their best traits are both present in Thorns. As this list is about 5 stars, being compared to a 6-star operator is some of the highest praise I can give, and the same can be said about the remaining operators on the list. While range guards are incredibly powerful and popular, just ask Silver Daddy over here, AoE guards are another popular archetype. BWCs, as I like to call them, or bitches with chainsaws, function as a hybrid between guards and defenders. What makes them stand out is the fact that they attack all enemies they block, and at E2, they gain the ability to block 3 enemies instead of just 2. This brings us to our favorite psychotic shark nun, Specter. Specter's first skill is a generic 60% attack boost for 30 seconds, which you might want to consider using sometimes because of how risky her second skill is. Once activated, Bone Fracture gives a 100% attack buff for 12 seconds, and while this skill is active, Specter's HP will not drop below 1, making her invincible. However, once this skill is over, she self-stuns for 10 seconds. Her talent, Stamina Up, is just a flat 10% max HP boost. As I said before, at E2 is when AoE guards shine, and Specter is no exception. Aside from the block 3 and her generic attack skills buff increasing to 100%, Specter's Bone Fracture at M3 now lasts for 15 seconds and gives her a 160% attack buff. It still has the invincibility effect and sadly also has the 10-second self-stun. However, Specter is unique in that her talent upgrades at M3 as she now gets Abyssal Regeneration, which still gives the 10% max HP boost, but also gives you regen, like the name says it does, as she recovers 2% of her max HP every second. The natural comparison to Specter is the 6-star AoE guard, Blaze. Blaze is one of the most popular operators in the game thanks to her second skill, which once charged has infinite duration, grants extended range, a slight defense buff, and a massive attack buff, but said buff isn't as powerful as Specter's. Blaze can give you more damage over time and can last longer against bosses, but needs additional resources to truly exceed. Specter, on the other hand, has self-sustainability and hits bosses harder with no drawbacks if you have good timing. Depending on your other operators and team composition, one may be better than the other, but both are definitely incredible. Hell, I'd consider running both, if I had Blaze. For those waiting for a male operator to appear on this list but gave up 5 spots ago, get ready as we're headed to the World Tree to see...
But up there, Elysium is waiting for us.
Elysium is a unique vanguard as he is a flag bearer, meaning he doesn't attack or block enemies while his skill is active. Elysium's first skill is Support Gamma. Support Gamma generates 18 deployment points, lasts for 8 seconds, and requires 29 SP to charge. His second skill, Monitor, costs 34 SP to charge, lasts for 15 seconds, generates 20 DP, and while active, it inflicts up to 4 enemies in a 2-tile radius of him with the Lock status. Lock status removes enemy invisibility, reduces their movement by 60%, and debuffs their defense by 25%. His talent, Sniper Support, reduces the deployment cost of all snipers by 1, and gives them plus 10 attack speed while his skill is active. If you're wondering which skill is more useful, wait till you hear his E2 capabilities. At E2, both of his talent effects are doubled, and Support Gamma now costs 26 SP to use and has the same benefits as before. Monitor is almost identical at M3 but only costs 30 SP to use, and the defense debuff increases to 35%. As for which skill is more useful, in the case of Elysium, it honestly depends. His direct comparison is the 4-star flag bearer, Myrtle. With Myrtle, there's no contest for which skill you use. One is a generic DP gain skill, and the other heals nearby operators while also generating deployment points. Obviously, you ignore that weak shit and M3 her first skill. I'm serious. While Elysium is a 5-star version of her, he isn't a straight upgrade as Myrtle's DP generation is better given the shorter cooldown between charges. Myrtle is easily the most used operator in Arknights. However, Elysium is still incredibly powerful, especially in future high-risk CC content, where some conditions require both of them to be used in order to clear reduced DP generation maps. If you have Myrtle E2'd already, then Elysium isn't a priority, and you can easily rely on his second skill to give some additional support. But if you don't have Myrtle E2'd, I would consider E2'ing Elysium and maxing out on his first skill. With a 4-star and 5-star flag bearer in the game, all we need is a 6-star one, which is secretly just Durin standing on top of Myrtle while wearing a trench coat. They got 6 stars combined between both of them after all. So now you're probably wondering, what could be better than operators who compare to 6 stars and the most used operator in the game? Well, the top 2 spots on this list are honestly interchangeable, but both have niches that currently surpass their 6-star counterparts. The first of these operators is Texas. Texas is a vanguard who specializes in crowd control. Ignoring her first skill because literally no one uses it, her second skill, Sword Rain, does the following. It instantly restores 11 deployment points. In a 1-tile radius and 2 tiles in cardinal directions of Texas, she launches an AoE which deals 135% of her attack as arts damage, and on top of that, stuns all targets hit for 2 seconds. If that sounds insane, wait until you hear her talent. Tactical Delivery gives you 1 additional deployment point at the start of a map. Listen, they had to balance out her busted ass skills somehow, and they did it with the talent. Thankfully, E2 Texas isn't a waste of resources, as you are completely justified in doing so, just for the badass artwork. At E2, her talent effect is doubled, and Sword Rain has all its traits buffed except for the range, as it now generates 12 deployment points, the attack modifier increases to 170%, and the stun lasts for 3 seconds now. There's not a lot for me to explain here. Texas is the best offensive vanguard in the game, full stop. Her best competition would be the 6-star vanguard, Siege. Siege and Texas have roughly the same stat line, with Siege having a bit more HP, but I think Texas is overall better for one reason other than her skill. Texas costs 13 deployment points while Siege costs 14. However, her talent can lower her effective cost to 11, and the 3 seconds you save by deploying an E2 Texas over an E2 Siege could be the difference between a failure and a 3-star clear. Use Texas whenever you can. Before we get to the number 1, I want to mention some special units who barely didn't make the cut. I already went over why Platinum and Praminix are good. Broca is an AoE guard who has great offensive capabilities but lacks durability. Astasia is an arts guard, but she focuses a little too much on defense for my liking. And finally, there's Executor, better known as... Now we come to who I think is the best 5-star in the game, T. Applesauce. The beloved Owl of Rhinelab is the best AoE healer in the game. Ptilopsis, like all AoE healers, has lower attack than single target healers, but she and all currently released AoE healers can heal up to 3 targets simultaneously. They also have a different healing range that covers 1 less row in front of them, but also covers the row behind them. Just like Texas, her first skill warrants 0 acknowledgement as it's a generic attack boost, which is strictly inferior to her second skill. Ptilopsis, how do I pronounce this?
Angophalan.
Thank you, computer. This skill costs a whopping 100 SP to activate, but when you use it, Ptilopsis' attack range covers an extra row in front of her, lasts for 36 seconds, and her attack interval drastically reduces as she now heals every 0.95 seconds, or about 3 times as quickly. Her talent, Skill Aura, increases the SP generation of operators with skills that charge automatically by 0.15. Already at E1, Ptilopsis is a fantastic operator, whose skills make it impossible for any operator in her range to die unless they get 1 shot at full health. However, Ptilopsis is one of the best E2 candidates in the game because of her upgrades. Ptilopsis must have been chilly at E1 because at E2 she gets a kick-ass coat, combat leggings, and decided to put on some pants. They're shorts. I guess she wasn't that cold, but I've seen weirder winter designs. Her second skill, which I still won't attempt to pronounce as it would be as accurate as
Ptilopsis,
has its duration increased to 40 seconds and further reduces her attack interval to 0.75 seconds. But the real sauce is in her talent. Skill Aura has its effects doubled, and the SP generation boost increases to an extra 0.3 extra SP per second. We've already talked about operators that can generate SP, but none of them come close to Ptilopsis. Her 30% SP additive is the best in the game, as this skill affects most operators you can use. However, this skill somehow gets even more broken, as they went out of their way to make this skill as cracked out as possible by giving it a global range. When comparing her to the 6-star AoE healer Nightingale, it's not even a contest as to who is better. Nightingale focuses on giving your operators more resistance with both her talent and skills, but there are very few instances where you would want resistance, instead of having more healing or greater burst damage to finish off enemy mages faster, which is exactly what Ptilopsis provides. Her burst healing is also the best in the game, as while the skill takes a long time to charge, it's mostly ready when she's deployed, and there are very few instances where you're going to need to use it more than once on a map. All of those reasons combined are why I think Ptilopsis is the best 5-star operator in the game. game. And that's it for the video. I don't really expect it to do all that well, but if the algorithm blesses me enough to get some Arknights fans here, maybe I could do another list like this for 6-star or even 4-star operators. Tell me how I did in the comments, and let me know who your favorite 5-star operator is, unreleased or otherwise. Mine is probably still Lappland because I'm a sucker for crazy bitches, and since she's based off of a wolf, that fits doubly well. Before I head out, please hit those like and subscribe buttons. Bell is optional as my channel's content is pretty damn random, and thanks again for watching. By doing all that, you help me get one LMD closer to affording that Chen figure. Alright, peace.